So for the weekday masses, what I like to do for the most part is, unless there's a special feast day or something, I like to preach and teach on the first reading. My line of thinking is, from my brief experience as a priest, many of you who are here faithfully every day. And so I think you are more familiar with the Gospels than you are with, your fellow parishioners who maybe just come to Mass on Sundays. But maybe most of you don't know, especially when we have today's first reading from the prophet Amos, you might be like, well, who's Amos? And so that's kind of my mindset here for my preaching. Before I do this, let me go through the whole Old Testament with you, okay? I just want to give you a context as to where we're at in the Old Testament, okay? I promise I'll be very quick with this. So in Genesis, you have the first 11 chapters: Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, Noah, Tower of Babel, okay? The people are very wicked. But then from that point, in Genesis chapter 12, we're going to have God calling of Abraham. And through Abraham, God makes a covenant that he's going to be a descendant of many nations. And Abraham's like, okay, well, Sarah and I are old, we're childless, good luck with that. Okay, but God is faithful to his promise. And then they have Isaac. And then Isaac has Jacob. And then Jacob has those 12 sons, which will be the core of the nation of Israel, the 12 tribes of Israel, named after the 12 sons of Jacob. The most notable one is Joseph with his multicolor cloak or whatever, okay? The other brothers are jealous of Joseph because he is Jacob's favorite, okay? Just like my siblings are jealous of me for that same reason, okay? All right? And so they sell Joseph to Egypt. Joseph has dreams. He rises to power in Egypt, becomes second in command, even predicts from his dreams what that Egypt and the rest of the lands are going to have a famine, and so they stockpile on food. The 11 other sons of Jacob come down because they're hungry. Joseph says, hey, it's me, don't worry, I forgive you. And then the rest, Jacob and the 11 sons, are now united in Egypt. 400 years later, okay, Pharaoh doesn't remember Joseph, and so they enslave these multi-descendants of the Hebrew people. All these people now are descendants of Abraham as God has promised, but the Pharaoh is afraid of them, and so he enslaves them. Then God calls Moses. Moses is like, I'm not going to do this. God's like, trust me, you'll be fine. Okay, Moses leads them out, plagues, all that stuff, into the wilderness, okay, where the people are thankful and faithful to God in the wilderness for delivering them to Egypt. Yeah, not so much, okay? They whine and complain and grumble against God, okay? Eventually, God gets fed up and says, Moses, you and the people are not entering the promised land. The people are like, oh, come on, okay? But then eventually, after Moses comes Joshua. Joshua then leads them back into the land that God promises Abraham, okay? During that time, there's a very loose type of authority. The people are unfaithful. Foreign nations come and invade them. Then you have these people called judges who rise up and save Israel from the foreign enemies. But then eventually the people get sick of this and say, hey, God, we want a king. And God's like, no, you're gonna regret this. And like, no, we really want a king. And so we have Saul, didn't work out too well. Then we have David, King David, okay, very important, King David, the line of the Messiah and the Davidic covenant is going to come through King David. And then we have Solomon, who completes the temple. And then after the death of Solomon, what do you have? You have this fight for power, and now the nation of Israel is now divided up into two kingdoms, a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom. And that's where we're at right here, okay, northern kingdom, southern kingdom. The time of these prophets, okay, Amos is one of these what they're called the minor prophets. Minor in the sense that their book isn't very long, okay? Unlike Isaiah and Daniel and Ezekiel, there's like 40 to 50 chapters. These are only like 5, 6, and in this case, Amos, 12 chapters long. Amos is from the southern kingdom, prophesying to the northern kingdom. Okay, very problematic because the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, they don't like each other. Okay, it's bad enough that you go and you preach God's word, a word of usually God's word is what? You sin and you need to change your life and the need to turn around. That's usually God's word. And guess what? People don't like to hear that type of message. Do you like to be told you're wrong? No. But this is what Amos is doing. And now we're in chapter 7. And we see this conflict between Amos and the priest of Israel. His name is Amaziah. Okay. Amaziah is telling Amos to get lost, pretty much. And what does Amos say? Here's the important lesson of today. Amos says, look, I was a shepherd and a dresser of sycamores. I was fine the way my life was. But then God came into my life. God gently invaded my life and gave me this divine task. Amos gets nothing. He gains nothing except being faithful to God in his mission of what? Of trying to call the northern kingdom, in this case, back to the one and true living God. You see, in the northern kingdom, they not only had what? They had a life of self-indulgence. The northern kingdom was the wealthier kingdom. And I think we as Americans know what can happen when we have a lot of wealth. We have a lot of false comforts and securities and also false idols that we depend on in life. And that was the northern kingdom's second problem, that of idolatry. Relying too much on their own wealth, on power, and also on false gods. And Amos is trying to get them to come back to that. But the important part that I want to just leave with this today is the fact that we don't go to God, we don't dictate to God what we're going to do. Instead, the life of a disciple, the life of the faithful Christian is letting God come into our lives, but also then letting God direct and lead us and giving us his divine mission. We have to be having hearts open to that of a servant, ready to listen and ready to follow what it is that God is leading us to do. May God bless you.